Prague, May 27, 1942. At 10:35 in the morning, a black Mercedes approached a sharp bend in the road. There was no armored escort around it, no convoy of motorcycles, no truck filled with armed guards, just a driver, and beside him, one of the most feared men in Nazi-occupied Europe, Reinhard Heydrich. As the Mercedes entered the curve, the driver had no choice but to slow. A man waiting beside the road stepped forward. His name was Jozef Gabčík. Hidden beneath his coat was a Sten submachine gun. For nearly 5 months, Gabčík and his partner Jan Kubiš had lived under false identities, moved between secret apartments, studied Heydrich's movements, and waited for this moment. Now the target was only meters away. Gabčík raised the weapon. He pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun had jammed. For a fraction of a second, the entire assassination mission seemed to have failed. Heydrich was alive. His car was almost within touching distance. And Gabčík was standing in the road holding a useless weapon. Then Jan Kubiš reached into his briefcase. What happened during the next few seconds would kill one of Hitler's most important officials, trigger one of the most brutal Nazi reprisals of the war, and leave entire Czech communities paying the price for an operation carried out on a quiet Prague street. But the strange thing about the attack was that Heydrich had helped make it possible. Not intentionally. He had simply become confident enough to believe that men like Gabčík and Kubiš could no longer reach him. To understand why 2 Czechoslovak soldiers had been sent to kill one man, the story has to move back to 1941. By then, Nazi Germany had controlled the Czech lands for more than 2 years. The former Czechoslovakia had been broken apart, and Bohemia and Moravia had become a German protectorate. Then, in September 1941, Reinhard Heydrich arrived in Prague. He was not an ordinary occupation official. Heydrich headed the Reich Security Main Office, the organization that controlled major elements of the Nazi security and police system. He had been closely involved in the persecution and murder of Jews, and would later play a central role at the Wannsee Conference, where senior Nazi officials coordinated the Europe-wide implementation of the so-called final solution. In Prague, Heydrich combined repression with calculated political control. Resistance networks were attacked, arrests increased, executions followed. At the same time, the occupation authorities tried to keep strategically important Czech industry functioning for Germany's war effort. For the Czechoslovak government in exile in London, this created a serious problem. Czechoslovakia had been occupied with relatively little visible armed resistance compared with some other occupied nations. Its leaders in exile wanted to demonstrate that the country had not simply accepted Nazi rule. British and Czechoslovak officials began planning an operation that would make that resistance impossible to ignore. Its code name was Anthropoid. Its target was Reinhard Heydrich. The men selected for the mission were Jozef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš. Gabčík was Slovak. Kubiš was Czech. Both had escaped their occupied homeland, served abroad, reached Britain, and volunteered for special operations. Their preparation was demanding. They trained in weapons, explosives, navigation, parachuting, sabotage, communications, and the techniques needed to survive behind enemy lines. This was not training for a normal battlefield. If captured in occupied territory, there was little reason to expect the protections normally given to conventional soldiers. Their greatest defense would be anonymity. In December 1941, before leaving Britain, the 2 men even made their last wills. They understood that they might never return. On the night of December 28th, into the early hours of December 29th, 1941, they were dropped by aircraft into occupied Czechoslovakia. Almost immediately, something went wrong. They had intended to land in the Pilsen region. Instead, a navigational error placed them near Nehvizdi, not far from Prague. Gabčík was injured during the landing. Their mission had barely begun, and already they were in the wrong place with one member hurt. Yet they survived the first night, recovered equipment they had hidden, contacted members of the underground, and slowly began working their way toward the objective. And this reveals something often lost in descriptions of Operation Anthropoid. Gabčík and Kubiš were not operating alone. Behind them stood a network of ordinary people. Families provided rooms. Resistance members arranged contacts. Doctors gave treatment. Others carried messages, found bicycles, supplied information, and helped two men who could bring the Gestapo to anyone associated with them. Many of those helpers would later pay with their lives. For months, the paratroopers studied possible ways to attack Heydrich. His residence was heavily protected. Other locations presented too many guards or too many civilians. They needed somewhere predictable, somewhere they could get close. And eventually they found it. Heydrich regularly traveled from his residence at Panenska Breziny towards central Prague. On the route was a tight bend leading into V. Holesovikač Street. A fast-moving car had to slow there. That curve transformed the problem. Gabčík would no longer have to hit a vehicle racing past him. For several seconds, Heydrich would be almost stationary. And there was another weakness. Heydrich often traveled in an open Mercedes with surprisingly limited protection. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum notes that his confidence in the apparent success of his policies had led him to disregard basic security precautions while traveling around Prague. That confidence brought him to the curve on the morning of May 27th. Gabčík and Kubiš took their positions. Another resistance member, Jozef Gabčík, was involved in supporting the operation. Then they waited. Minutes passed. Heydrich did not appear. The danger of remaining in one location increased with every moment. Then the Mercedes finally came into view. Its distinctive insignia made the passenger clear. Heydrich was sitting beside his driver, Johannes Klein. The car entered the sharp bend. The brakes were applied. The Mercedes slowed. Gabčík moved. He stepped toward the road, brought up the Sten gun, and aimed at Heydrich. Everything they had trained for had been compressed into a few seconds, and the weapon failed. The Czech Defense Ministry's historical account states simply that at the critical moment, the Sten malfunctioned. No burst of bullets struck the car. No immediate escape began. Instead, Gabčík was exposed in front of the man he had been sent to kill. What Heydrich did next was crucial. Instead of ordering his driver to accelerate away, he had the car stop as he prepared to fight back. That decision gave Jan Kubiš his chance. Kubiš had been carrying specially prepared explosives. He drew one from his briefcase and threw it toward the Mercedes. The bomb did not land inside the vehicle. It exploded near the right rear section of the car. Metal tore through the bodywork. Kubiš himself was wounded by fragments. For a moment, it was not clear that the assassination had succeeded at all. Heydrich was still conscious. Gabčík fled. Kubiš escaped separately. And neither man could know that fragments from the explosion had penetrated Heydrich's body. A passing vehicle eventually carried the wounded Nazi official to Bulovka Hospital. Doctors operated on him. His spleen was removed. Initially, there was reason to believe he might survive. That created an uncomfortable possibility for the resistance. They had exposed themselves. The largest manhunt the occupation authorities could organize was beginning, and the target might recover. But over the following days, Heydrich's condition worsened. On June 4th, 8 days after the attack, he died. The assassination had succeeded, but success would open a far darker chapter of the story. The Nazi reaction began almost immediately after the attack. Martial law was imposed. Rewards were offered for information. Police raids spread across the protectorate. Thousands of people came under suspicion. Hitler reacted with fury and initially demanded enormous retaliation against the Czech population. The goal was no longer simply to locate two assassins. It was to demonstrate what resistance to German rule would cost. One village would become the most infamous example. Lidice was a small community roughly 20 kilometers from Prague. The Germans claimed to have found a connection between the village and the assassins. In reality, the evidence did not establish that Lidice had played a meaningful role in Operation Anthropoid. That did not matter. On the night of June 9th and 10th, German forces surrounded the village. The men were separated from the women and children. 173 men and older boys were shot during the initial massacre. More residents were killed later. The women were deported, many to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Most of the children were taken away. Some were selected for Germanization. Around 80 of the remaining children were murdered at the Chelmno killing center. Then the buildings of Lidice were destroyed. The Nazis attempted to erase the village itself. The reprisals did not end there. The village of Ležáky was also destroyed. Resistance supporters were arrested. Families connected to the paratroopers were hunted down. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, thousands were arrested during the reprisals, and more than 1,000 people received death sentences. The assassination of one senior Nazi official had become the justification for collective punishment on a massive scale. Meanwhile, Gabčík and Kubiš remained hidden. For days, the Gestapo could not find them. Eventually, 7 Czechoslovak paratroopers gathered inside the Orthodox Church of St. Cyril and Methodius in Prague. Gabčík was there. Kubiš was there. So were Adolf Opalka, Josef Bublik, Jan Hruby, Jaroslav Svarch, and Josef Valčík. Their hiding place might have remained secret longer if not for betrayal. Another paratrooper, Karel Kurda, eventually went to the Gestapo and provided information about resistance contacts. That information allowed investigators to penetrate the support network. By June 17th, the Germans had discovered where the men were hiding. Before dawn on June 18th, German forces surrounded the church. At approximately 4:15 in the morning, the perimeter closed. The men inside understood what that meant. There would be no quiet escape. German troops entered the church. 3 of the paratroopers, including Jan Kubiš, were positioned in the upper part of the building. A firefight followed. Grenades exploded inside. Gunfire struck the windows and walls. Kubiš was severely wounded. He would not survive. When the upper church had been taken, the Germans still faced 4 men hiding in the crypt beneath the building. Among them was Jozef Gabčík. The crypt became their final position. German forces tried to force the defenders out. Firefighters were brought in. Water and tear gas were driven through openings. The attackers eventually discovered another entrance beneath a stone slab near the altar and used explosives to reach the underground area. There was nowhere left to go. Gabčík and the remaining men chose death rather than capture. By the time the fighting ended, the 2 men who had waited beside that Prague road less than a month earlier were both dead. Operation Anthropoid had achieved its immediate objective. Reinhard Heydrich was dead. He was one of the highest-ranking Nazi leaders killed by resistance forces during the Second World War. But describing the operation simply as a successful assassination misses the most difficult part of its history. There were several outcomes, not one. For the Czechoslovak government in exile, the operation demonstrated unmistakably that armed Czech resistance existed. For the Nazi regime, Heydrich's death became an excuse for extraordinary repression. For the families who sheltered the parachutists, the consequences were often fatal. And for Lidice and Ležáky, the cost was catastrophic. There is another reason the story remains so striking. The plan did not work the way its designers expected. Gabčík's gun failed. Kubiš's bomb missed the interior of the car. Heydrich was not killed at the scene. The assassins escaped without knowing whether they had succeeded. Yet the operation still reached its objective because several small decisions came together. The decision to choose a sharp curve. Heydrich's decision to travel with limited protection. His driver's need to slow the Mercedes. And finally, Heydrich's decision to stop rather than escape after Gabčík's weapon failed. That is what makes those few seconds on May 27th so important. The most heavily prepared moment of the mission immediately turned into improvisation. The gun that was supposed to kill Heydrich did not fire. The bomb that became decisive did not land where intended. And the men carrying out the attack had no way of knowing, as they fled through Prague, that their target would die 8 days later. They could only know that something had gone wrong and that the Gestapo would now be looking for them. Behind the famous story of the assassination is therefore a larger one. It is the story of 2 soldiers who volunteered for a mission with little expectation of returning, of families who risked everything to hide them, of a Nazi official whose confidence made him vulnerable, and of innocent people who were murdered afterward for an operation they had never planned and in many cases knew nothing about. The black Mercedes slowing into that Prague curve created the opportunity the assassins had waited months to see. But the consequences of those few seconds would continue long after the car itself had stopped.